All right, welcome to Modern Mondays here at Guardian Games. I'm Travis Cooper, hanging out with Ian Lunger, and we're just jumping right into this. It looks like we have a matchup here for round number 1 out of 4 of Blue-Red Murktide versus Grixis Shadow. And started us off fast there with a Fetch Shock into a Thoughtseize.
Put these ones back. At least to simplify the options.
All right, an important decision. We've got a Heat, a Ledger Shredder, an Iteration ×2, a Darcy, and a Bobble. I think it probably depends on the context of your hand, but I thought that Darcy was a good choice there, as that's a obvious turn 1 play that's going to net Chris some advantage with the trigger with the Mishra's Bobble. And looks like Chris, if a land was drawn, is going to be set up for a Shredder plus Bobble, which is a pretty strong play. Shredder being a 1/3 to start off with is kind of insulation for an early Unholy Heat. And are you there with us, Ian?
Yes, I am.
Okay, just making sure you weren't dead over there.
No, I'm here. I'm here. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, man, it's been a while. It's been a month. We had some stuff happen. We had some COVID exposures. There was some fear. Fear was not realized, and then it was realized, and I had COVID, and yeah, some things happened. All right, looks like an Inquisition or another. Let's see. Another Thoughtseize got that Shredder there. And so that is 2 out of probably 14 threats down. I know the Murktide deck is playing somewhere between 12 and 14 threats at this point. Since Shredder came out, there's not been a definitive like 75. There's still some flex spots there with the number of Shredders, number of Murktides, maybe number of Darcys, plus the 18th or 19th land. Which one? Yeah, which version do you play? So
I do love that we've continued to have some evolution and some churn in Modern. It's always the worry that MH2 is just going to have completely taken over and we're just going to see a stagnant meta, but Ledger Shredder seems to have given us a bit of a shot in the arm. It's a card that can be put in a lot of decks. It spawns some new archetypes.
Yeah, it's a really cool card that has interesting synergies that I think it makes previous archetypes like consider the amount that you'd play and then maybe shaving on some other cards. In the Murktide deck, it's made you a bit more resilient to graveyard hate, which I think is pretty important because post-board, it used to be like if your opponent had a Rest in Peace or ways to consistently nuke your graveyard, Darcys and Murktides are pretty subpar, but Shredder sort of gives an out to that.
Huh. I have a feeling those life totals are swapped. I will be right back for just a moment.
What's the size of those right now? They are upkeep. I'm going to draw from my bobble. Yep.
All right, the Bobble draw and draw for turn.
Sure. I am at 18.
All right, switching around the life totals there so it accurately reflects the overlay. Ian managed to move the stream deck without exploding our stream. That's always a plus.
Oh, yeah.
We're on some tenuous. We're holding the fort together here with duct tape and gaffer's tape and rubber bands. So we're keeping the ship going.
Yeah.
All right.
Wow. This is a lot of pressure on Chris.
They're still in heat range though, which is nice. currently. They might not be. We'll see what happens.
Pretty scary to get the Death Shadow out of heat range in this matchup. Because the minute you're out of heat range, you're in one-hit Murktide range.
Yeah, but there's not a lot that Murktide can do once the shadows are out of heat range.
Yeah, I mean, Chris is at quite a healthy life total. So, but it's looking like, well, does Chris have a Murktide in hand?
I see an iteration, a lightning bolt. Let's switch to the hand cam and see what Chris has in hand. Got an iteration, a bolt, a Murktide.
Yeah,
and
a counterspell.
And Alicia's thinking about this iteration here. Maybe see a Planeswalker. Good. And we're exiling the Watery Grave, which, if you shock that in, you do get the shadow to 7. Which that's it. 7's an important number when your removal does 6 damage in the form of Unholy Heat, and taking Chris down to 11. Whoa! Have not seen that Delve friend in quite a while. The fish is making an appearance here.
Yeah, Alyssa has eschewed the dragon in favor of the fish. So oh man. Chris has got to play Murktide this turn. You got to assume that we're going to see Murktide hit the field. Although, what, only 2 sorceries in grave, or 2 instants or sorceries in graveyard? So maybe not. Murktide's just not going to be big enough at the moment. We hit Opt and Unholy Heat, or excuse me, consider an Unholy Heat as part of the selection.
Oh man.
Interesting. You would have thought Unholy Heat seemed like kind of the easy one that would have been cast main phase. I'm a little surprised that we see, feels like well, I guess it doesn't matter. If this is the way Chris is going to play, it doesn't really matter one or the other.
Yeah,
I might have expected to see Unholy Heat be the one exiled if that was for sure going to be the cast. But Alyssa with the dress down in hand and the game's all wrapped up.
Yeah, I was really into thinking about Chris's lines there, but it didn't matter. I was gonna do some analyzing, but then when your Death Shadow turns into 13/13, it kind of the decisions he made didn't really matter.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like Chris just blasted through that turn, and I mean that obviously the critical turn. I'm not sure if Chris had any other recourse there.
There was the option of Chris had both 2 steam vents up and a lightning bolt and heat, so there was an option to bolt and heat the Death Shadow, which would have given you an out to a dress down, and then your follow-up play of a Murktide would trade favorably in combat with Gurmag Angler, and there's not a lot that Alicia could do to push through more damage from that Angler. So that may have, even though you're sort of like down a card in that situation, by, that's casting the iteration, you're sort of like at card parity for the turn. So that may have been the more conservative line there. Because, leaving the shadow on the table just presents a lot of interesting problems for the future in terms of like dress down, managing life totals, like dying in one hit, etc. So.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's hard to say that something's wrong. I mean, Chris, I'm sure, is aware that dress down was a lethal option for that turn, but sometimes when the deck played TBR, you just have to hope they don't have it.
Yeah, and also the Grixis Shadow deck is going through a lot of different build iterations, and there's not. It's similar to how Murktide is these days, where there's not a set 75 or even like a set 70. Some like a recent deck that placed only played 3 Death Shadows and was all in on kind of Ledger Shredder as the premier threat, and Shadow was just a kind of a payoff card when you're playing Thoughtseizes. And that deck was also playing Turbinates, but then there's more, traditional builds that are playing Dress Downs, the full set of Shadows, 4 Ragavans, 4 Darcys. So I feel like we're at this interesting point in Modern where you don't exactly know, even when you can suss out what style of deck your opponent's playing, what most of the cards in the deck are.
So what would you expect Chris to be taking out in this matchup? What do you feel like are not very good cards here?
Looks like Chris is taking out 2 Spell Pierces, maybe? I'm unsure, some amount of Ragavans. I actually like in this matchup, I take out, when I play Murktide and I play against Shadow, I take out all of my Darcys and then maybe 2 Baubles, maybe not, depending on how many Shredders you're running, because the must attack clause of Darcy is a liability sometimes, where you're wanting to just have removal and have counter spells. You're wanting to beat your opponent on the amount of iterations you want to be casting those. You want to prevent them from casting. So I like any kind of counter magic. I usually board in Fluster Storms if that's something that's in your board. If you have additional threats like a Planeswalker, Jace is pretty good. Usually these Shadow lists are playing Drown on the Lock and Unholy Heat, maybe a Lightning Bolt, maybe not. And Jace is pretty resilient to everything but Heat, and then you still get a Brainstorm if that happens. So yeah, I don't know what... there's different sideboard builds in Murktide right now. Some are more into Fury and Blood Moon. Some are more into some Planeswalkers like Jace. Not quite sure what Chris is on. Do you have thoughts or feelings?
Well, we got a brief glimpse as to what Chris was bringing in. It looked like some number, maybe just a single unlicensed hearse came in. And then I was a little distracted as to what the other cards were, but it looked like Chris brought in somewhere around 5 cards there. And it looked like Chris felt like the Ragavans were not going to be so good. So it looked like Chris was taking out Ragavans, which...
Yeah, I think Ragavan is one of the better cards in the matchup, but it's not a game where you're going to play turn... Maybe if you're on the play, you might play turn 1 Ragavan, but it's going to be just a late game kind of engine card. So I think it's a very important card in the matchup.
I think I'm inclined to agree, but it is interesting. Chris did ultimately opt, it looks like, to keep in all of the Darcys and take out Ragavans instead. Pretty cool in my mind that's like very much a decision point, even at this point in kind of like the late stage of MH2 Modern, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, I mean, that sideboard decision, you're saying you are the aggressive deck, right? If you're leaving in your Darcys at that point, because you want to have Unholy Heat turned on, because you want to take out those Death Shadows that are going to be between 6 and 4 power, but that means your Darcy's attacking every turn. So.
Right. I could also see if you're playing a Murktide heavy build, some of the Shredder builds have eschewed the full 4 Murktides. So maybe it's a little bit easier to side out your Darcys if you have a bunch of Ledger Shredders to fill the yard for Murktide.
Yeah, and usually, I mean, I would assume that a deck like Grixis Shadow is going to have some spell bombs in it to nuke your graveyard. So Darcy's... There's an argument either way, because if your opponent's nuking your graveyard, you're going to want to fill it more, and Darcy helps that. But then also it can make attacks really awkward. So
It is very interesting here. I think Alicia clearly agrees that they are the aggressor here, taking the expressive iteration out of the hand and leaving the Murktide, which would suggest that Alicia has some answers for Murktide. As that can be a scary card in this matchup.
Yeah, usually there's some amount of Terminate that are in the main deck or sideboard of the Grixis builds.
It also looks like there's a Nile Spellbomb in hand for Alicia. So maybe kind of expecting to let Chris kind of run out some cards to the yard and then nuke the yard before Murktide becomes a viable threat.
That's such a dangerous strategy because there's how priority works. A lot of times you might not get a chance to blow it up when you'd want to. I feel like you have to deploy it now and then blow it up after Chris considers.
That seems to be the potential tack here. Alicia playing very patient games so far.
I think an interesting thing that Chris could do is not cast this in-step consider. Wait. If you draw a land, you're going to really make Alicia like play either aggressively have to blow up the spell bomb and then you're going to get consider to resolve and put cards in the graveyard, or you're going to have her not respond and then going to have a Murktide. So I kind of don't like the in-step consider there.
So this absolutely forces it. Yeah. I think you're right that it would definitely put Alicia to the test. Otherwise, but I think pretty clear spell bomb there. Although if Chris was aware, although I think this Ragavan was drawn off the top with the consider.
It was, yeah, or the Bobble, one of the two. But that's a
Yeah.
great spot for Ragavan right there.
Agreed. Hits a Street Wraith. one of the worst hits that you can have. Street Wraiths and lands, not terribly helpful here.
Unknown cards in hand is 1. Okay.
I must say I very much like Alicia's position at this point in the match.
Also, I like her choice of basics too.
Tough to go wrong, yeah. And I want to say, is that an Odawara that Chris has in foil in the bottom left? Tough to tell on that one.
Well, we could look at the hand cam.
Oh no, it's just a treasure from Ragavan, of course. Of course.
Oh, okay, I thought you meant in the hand. It looks like Chris is ditching the Ragavan, which is interesting. I guess you know about the Fatal Push existing. Right. You get a follow-up Thoughtseize.
So this is almost certainly going to take the Murktide. I mean, you're playing a dangerous game if you take the Bolt, but...
Man, I can't believe Chris didn't discard the Scalding Tarn to the Croxa.
It's a little surprising, huh?
Yeah, I feel like the Murktide deck plays really well on just 3 lands, and especially I kind of like holding on to the Tarn at this point because you don't need the, unless you maybe boarded in Fury and want to hardcast it, which could be what's going on with Chris. But I'm willing to discard a land and take 3 from Croxa to not have to like dump a card.
Yeah, so now they're playing kind of a little bit of a game of chicken here with this DRC. Chris is going to throw out the DRC, which Alicia's going to have to deal with given that they're at 7. But the Bolt...
Looks like we got lots of ways to deal with it. There's the push. Looks like we are playing Murktide
Wow.
and Angler. Interesting.
Wild. I wonder if that's an intent, like, I wonder if that's a budget-related decision or if that's actual, like, I think that Angler's better in some instances and Murktide is better in some instances.
Power spot. Cast lightning bolt trigger.
All right, Chris is getting a little. I mean, not much else you could do, but you want to get that Surveil, and Bolt's probably not doing much to this Murktide, but taking Alicia down to 4.
That does seem like that is a significant amount of stress on your yard to be playing Gurmag Anglers, Murktide Regents, and Croxas.
I don't take any
Yeah,
damage
yeah.
if I discard a
Non-land. Yeah, sorry. I forget.
It's okay. It'll be your turn.
I play a lot of cards. I took a couple year-long break.
That's all
I'm
good.
not intimately familiar with everything.
All right, got another Thoughtseize. We got a Bolt.
That Thoughtseize probably not going to get cast this game. Pretty scary to think about casting Thoughtseize against the Lightning Bolt deck when you're at 4.
And then I'm going to 12.
Yeah, okay. I see. If I stood, yeah.
Although if Alicia finds himself in a position where they need to fetch, you know, 3 and 1, fairly similar.
Island and then turn 2 untouch the events.
Okay, I think
I think 3 and 1 are different when you do Dash Ragavan math.
Sure. yeah. If you know you don't have an answer to Dash Ragavan.
Mode is draw 2 cards.
All right,
Chris.
we're countering the Archmage's Charm. And it feels like Alicia's in a fairly commanding position here. And
Yep. Got all the answers. And I mean, this is what they both decided the matchup was going to look like. Alicia decided that they were going to be on the control side of things. Chris decided also based on the sideboarding decisions that we saw that he would be on the aggressive side of things. Wow. So are you just blowing this spell bomb up right now? And it looks like the answer is yes.
And I kind of didn't like the cast Shredder with nothing else in your hand, because a lot of times what you want to do is cast Shredder and then another spell in a turn. And so unless you're planning on chump blocking the Murktide, there's no advantage to casting a Shredder when you top deck it right there.
Speaking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're still at the point where chump blocking the Murktide is not a necessity, so Chris could have in fact waited as well on this Shredder.
All right, it's the perhaps one of lightning bolts. Maybe there's some more in there. Who knows? And we tie it up 1-1.
No, that's it, man.
That's it.
Alicia takes it.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
That
Death
happened so
Death
fast.
Shadow. Remember, swing with the dress down game one.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right.
And,
Okay. Well, slow
finish it
on
off.
the uptake here.
Finish it off with the Murktide game two, buddy. We're out of this one.
All right, we do have a backup match. I'm going to go out there and sort of shuffle some players around, but we'll return in a second and have another game for you.